Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Have you ever wondered what are the foundational principles that should form your Christian faith? In this clip, Bishop Barron explains the five principles that have really shaped him, and he discusses the five heroes of the faith from which they come. As I thought about this clip, it really is five principles that will make you more like Jesus, if you heed them, and we all know that we need more of that. Let's watch this clip, and I will have concluding remarks at the end.
Here's the first principle that undergirds my work. I'm going to name each one, by the way, for a figure from the tradition. The first one is the Irenaeus principle. So maybe if you've been following me, you know that St. Irenaeus is a theological hero of mine. I think in many ways, along with Origen and Augustine, the greatest of the church fathers. Irenaeus always said that he was taught by Polycarp, who was taught by John. And so by a couple of quick steps, he goes right back to the apostolic age and claims that authority. But the great adage that I quote probably ad nauseum is Gloria Dei Homo Vivens from Irenaeus. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. Now, why is it important? Because I think beginning for all kinds of reasons in early modernity, but very much enduring to our time, is the assumption, is the presumption that somehow God and we are rivals. God's a threat to our flourishing. For God to get the glory, I have to get less glory. Well, see, Irenaeus saw through that long ago. No, the glory of God is when we are fully alive. And the metaphysical reason for that is that God is not a being competing with us on the same sort of playing field. God is the sheer act of to be itself informs and undergirds and makes real finite reality. Therefore, he's not competing with us. His proximity enhances our humanity. See, I love that adage because it's the ground of all Christian humanism. A human being fully alive, homo vivens, that's politics and art and science and literature and friendship and all the things that make life wonderful. That's what God wants for us. I've often shared, you probably heard the image of the burning bush, comes to mind. As God comes close, the bush is on fire, but not consumed. In other words, it's more radiant, more beautiful, and it's not consumed by God's proximity. Contrast that, by the way, with the Greek and Roman gods, who always come barreling into the world. Something has to give or be incinerated as the gods enter. On the contrary with the God of the Bible, whose proximity makes us more alive. That's a basic word on fire principle for me. We have to proclaim to our culture that has, believe me, taken in this prejudice that God's a threat to our flourishing. We have to keep announcing, no, the more God invades the totality of our life, personally and societally, the more alive we are. So that's the first principle. Second one, and again, you've probably heard me talk about it a lot, is the Augustine principle. Lord, you have made us for yourself, therefore our heart is restless until it rests in thee. Page 1 of the Confessions of Augustine. It's the greatest statement in the entire tradition of Catholic or Christian anthropology. How Christians understand the human being. That's the best statement of it. Lord, you've made us for yourself. Therefore, and then Augustine doesn't say our hearts in his Latin, but cor nostrum, he says, our hearts. So what he's saying is we all have this in common. No matter our background, no matter who you are, no matter how you've been shaped and formed. Everybody has this restless heart. I've taken it as fundamental to all my work in evangelization. Is I just go forth assuming everybody's hungry for God. Now, as Augustine well knew, it takes strange form very often. So the restless heart hooks onto something less than God. And for my money, that's the best single diagnosis of what goes wrong with human beings. Now, we can analyze it psychologically and economically and politically, but at the bottom level, that's what goes wrong with all of us sinners, is we take the infinite desire for God and we hook it onto something less than God. And it makes us frustrated first and then addicted. And you see that throughout the Bible, story after story. Something less than God becomes the focus of the deepest longing of the heart, well, then I become addicted to it. because I have to get more and more and more of it. It never satisfies me. What the classical spiritual writers called concupiscence is very close to what we call today addiction. See, my assumption is almost everybody you talk to in the world today is addicted to something because their hungry hearts, their restless hearts are not properly directed. That's what my work is about in many ways, is directing the restless heart the right way. That's my hope for everyone involved in Word on Fire. It actually constitutes one of the basic arguments for God's existence, doesn't it? If we have a desire that's truly natural to us, that desire orders us towards something real. Right? So our hunger for food is an indication there really is food that will satisfy it. And our thirst, it really is an indication that there's something out there to satisfy it. So in a similar way, we all have a hunger and thirst for the infinite. It's a sign that there really is an infinite fulfillment of that desire. So the Augustinian principle, when people are berating me on social media, so whenever you go on social media, people will make comments, right? And they typically don't comment by saying, "My Bishop, that was a wonderful observation. Thank you so much. It's changed my life." You rarely hear that. You hear someone attack it. But the key, I think, to any good evangelist is to know behind that question, there's somebody with a restless heart. And look, they're coming on a website dedicated to religious themes. So, there's something drawing them, and it's the Augustinian. Third principle I'm naming for John of Damascus. John Damascene, maybe not a household name, but this figure he bridges the 7th into the 8th century. John Damascene took a lead role in the iconoclast controversy of that time. It was a pivotal moment in the history of the church. There were those who were saying, for all kinds of reasons, some going back to the Old Testament, some coming from Islam, which was emerging right at that time, that we shouldn't make images for God. Right? It's an insult to God. It's idolatrous. Don't make graven images. And so the iconoclasts, the breakers of icons, well, they were countered by the iconophiles, those who love icons. And their leading articulate spokesman was John of Damascus. Now, I think he's so important because if he had lost that battle, if the iconoclasts had won, there'd be no Notre Dame or Chartres Cathedral, there'd be no Sainte-Chapelle, there'd be no Sistine Chapel ceiling. The whole history of Christian art and iconography and the visual representation of the faith wouldn't have happened. Of course, his central argument is really interesting, John of Damascus. It was, well, look, God made an icon of himself. So the incarnational sensibility, and that's Paul's own language, that Christ is the icon of the invisible God. And that's the key, isn't it? So a visible icon, the humanity of Jesus, becomes the means by which we have access to the invisible God. And that's how one prays with an icon. By extension, that's how one can use the visible, the visual, the artistic, the sensual, to have access to the invisible things of God. That, to me, is a fundamentally important principle, and you know that from my work. I believe in preaching, I believe in the power of the word, but I think you evangelize through beauty. So I've taken Balthasar as a key influence. Balthasar, who reversed the transcendentals. Instead of going from the true to the good, the beautiful, he begins with the beautiful. In fact, Balthasar thought that the beautiful was often the kind of the poor stepchild of the transcendentals. There's a lot of focus on the true and the good in our tradition. Indeed, there is. And the beautiful is more of an afterthought. And he said, no. In fact, it's the first of the transcendentals. Because it's the beautiful that first gets your attention. It's the splendor of something that makes us, we look and we take it in. And then once we take it in, well, then the mind engages the truth of it and the will engages the goodness of it. But beauty comes first. I think with our child in the back there, Balthasar said that the door that opens someone to all of being is the smile of his mother. It's a lovely idea that the child and the mother smiling, it's the beauty of her smile that opens the child to the good and the true in all of their capaciousness. So finally, it's that little door opened by the beautiful. Now, maybe if you followed me, trace that all the way back to Plato's Symposium, come up through Dante, go all the way to James Joyce, we find that theme over and over again of the particular beautiful that opens us to the sea of the beautiful itself. Well, I mean, I take that as axiomatic in my work, that beauty, beauty, beauty is a route of access to evangelization. That's why we did the Word on Fire Bible the way we did. I mean, you could have a Bible, the text of it, with all kinds of rich commentary. We have that. But I wanted that Bible to be beautiful, that you sit down and you want to contemplate that Bible. Now, you know, what was it these last several days I've told my friends here, I think it's the best view I've ever had from a hotel room ever in my life. It's right across the river, and I open the drapes in the morning. There's the entire complex of the Houses of Parliament. Puget, of course, deeply Catholic architecture. Very ecclesiastical looking building, isn't it? But what is it? I'll spend an hour just gazing at it. It's because the beautiful is the first of the transcendentals. It's what grabs our attention. I would like everyone in this room, if you want to be an evangelist, to evangelize through beauty. How important the beauty of this culture is, you know? So that's the John of Damascus principle. It's anti-Kantian. So, you know, Immanuel Kant, the greatest of the modern philosophers. But Kant's influence, boy, it's enormous because he reduced religion to ethics. This came up in a conversation last night that I had. You know, when you get push comes to shove, what religion's all about, Kant said, is ethics. So liturgy and sacraments and all that is reducible to ethics, making us good persons. Well, that's all over the place today, isn't it? You know, it all comes down to social justice. Well, yeah, we love the commitment to social justice, but it doesn't all come down to social justice. That's a reductionism that we ought to avoid because the beautiful opens up all these other horizons. Okay, so the Irenaeus principle, the Augustine principle, the John of Damascus principle, and then fourthly is the Thomas Aquinas principle. So here's my intellectual hero, the person who changed my life when I was a kid and set me on a path I'd never really left. Faith and reason, obviously, Thomas is the great avatar of the faith and reason relationship, that we avoid that bifurcation. We don't say, you know, by faith alone, we don't drive a wedge between faith and reason, but we use our minds. We're a smart religion. And I keep banging pulpits and podiums all over the world. I'll bang this one too. To make that point, because we've so suffered from it, everybody. I can't really speak for here, speak my own country, but the dumbing down of our faith was a pastoral disaster. Not just intellectual disaster, it was a pastoral disaster. Because survey after survey will show that's why young people have disaffiliated. Again and again they'll say, because religion just seems stupid, or it doesn't make sense, I don't believe the doctrines. Science refutes religion. And so, in many ways, we did this to ourselves when we threw away many of our intellectual weapons. When I was coming of age, apologetics was a bad thing. It meant you were defensive, you were anti-ecumenical, you weren't respectful of other points of view, you know, you were a cramped rationalist. No, but we need apologetics all the time, from Irenaeus and Origen all the way through C.S. Lewis. We've had this marvelously apologetic tradition. The fact that we threw away those weapons was one reason why the new atheists, many of whom were started right here, right? Why many of the new atheists had such an impact. And God bless us, they're terrible. They're nothing new about them. They're just rehearsing these old tired arguments from the 19th century and the existentialists and all that. But that we were so ill-equipped to deal with those, frankly, superficial objections to religion. That's a commentary, a very negative commentary, on the fact that we had robbed ourselves of our own intellectual tradition, I think. You got the sense I feel strongly about this. Relatedly, man, how we have underestimated what especially young people are capable of. Something I'll tell you, I'm proud of this. When I started doing my work with the videos and that sort of thing years ago, many, many, many people said to me, "Oh gosh, Father, this is way over people's heads. You can't sit from a bookcase and with your Roman collar on and talk about Thomas Aquinas. I mean, come on, no one's going to listen to that. Well, by God, they have listened. We have 125 million views on YouTube, and I'm darn proud of that. And I throw it back in the faces of my early critics who felt that, no, people aren't capable. Nonsense. Of course they're capable of it. And I loved it. I never designed any of those videos for high school kids, or you call them secondary students here, right? Secondary school. But I was delighted when teachers came to me and said, oh, yeah, I'm using them in my classroom. Good. Because my generation, believe me, we all thought, oh gosh, the kids can't handle anything. They're handling advanced physics in high school. They're handling advanced chemistry, advanced literature. They're reading Shakespeare. Why couldn't they handle something more advanced in religion? So the Aquinas principle says in our evangelizing, we got to stop dumbing it down. We got to stop underestimating what people are capable of, and we've got to feed them serious stuff. I told this story the other day. So I mentioned the new atheist, Christopher Hitchens. I kind of a guilty pleasure, I suppose, listening to Hitchens because I just sort of liked his style, and his moxie. But I was on a radio program this many years ago, 20 years ago. It was a Canadian program, and they were interviewing me about Hitchens because he was all the rage at the time, and all his objections. And so I answered them for an hour, But at the end, the fellow said to me, well, Father, would you at least admit this, that Hitchens got you Catholics thinking about these things for the first time? I did that, and I said, Origen, Irenaeus, Augustine, Chrysostom, Jerome, Anselm, Bonaventure, Thomas Aquinas, John Henry Newman, G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis. I said, trust me when I tell you, we did not need Christopher Hitchens to get us thinking about these things for the first time, But look, I don't entirely blame him because we did that to ourselves. We dumbed down the operation, and we got to stop that. Okay, enough of that. So there's the Aquinas principle. Last one, and then I'll stop. Last one I'm going to call the Fulton-Sheen principle. I know he's not as well known here. I spoke the other day at St. Patrick's in Soho, and that's where Sheen, of course, the great American evangelist, the first one to really use radio and television in a powerful way. He used to go there. He'd come to England on vacations or when he was studying, and he lived at St. Patrick's and preached there. So a strong association. He loved London, by the way. In fact, Chesterton wrote the preface to Sheen's first book. His doctoral paper he turned into a book, and he got Chesterton somehow to write the preface for it. Anyway, Fulton Sheen, who taught philosophy and religion and apologetics for about 20-some years at Catholic University in Washington. It's my alma mater. And then when he was probably in his, late 30s or 40s, he gets into radio first, did the Catholic Hour for many years, and then famously gets on television in the 1950s, where he outperformed the biggest entertainers of the time, Frank Sinatra and Jackie Gleason and Milton Berle. He was topping the top entertainers of the time. The reason I invoke him is Sheen faced a lot of the same thing that I faced early on, namely people saying to him, look, Bishop, you can't do anything serious on radio or television. It's going to be superficial by its very nature, and I don't bother. It's just going to dumb it down. Well, Sheen, calling upon his own very rich intellectual formation, he had the agrégé, advanced doctorate from Louvain, calling upon all of that and showing great rhetorical skill and understanding the culture very well, was indeed able to proclaim the faith in such a way that he galvanized millions of people across the English-speaking world. But somehow it's funny to me still. I don't entirely understand it. After Sheen, we dropped the ball, seems to me. After Sheen, we Catholics just became terrible at the use of the media. And that's what I started to see in the 1990s was we have to follow Sheen. We have to use this tool at a time of radical disaffiliation. We've been given in God's providence a tool to reach the disaffiliated. And that's what inspired me to use, all the range now of the new media. And so I think you can do it in a way that's appealing to a more general audience and yet substantive and reflective of the richness of the tradition. So I invoke Sheen So if you're interested in the word on fire ethos or sensibility, I'd put it in those five: Irenaeus, Augustine, John of Damascus, Thomas Aquinas, and Fulton Sheen. That's what's animated me, and hope it might animate you.
So let's try to summarize what Bishop Barron is saying. He starts by citing St. Irenaeus and the principle that he has extracted from him that humans were meant to be fully alive. The imagery of Moses and the burning bush is the frequent biblical citation that Bishop Barron goes back to often to explain this principle. We're meant to be just completely on fire for God. It's as if God is literally like he was in the bush there, completely surrounding the bush, almost in the bush, but not consuming it, as Bishop Barron talks about a lot. In other words, we were meant to be fully alive. We were meant to be radiating God's glory. The second thing that Bishop Barron mentions is the Augustinian principle, this idea that we are restless until we have this fully alive experience. We are restless until we are connected and in communion with God, our Father's, the Trinity, right? When we're with God. And he specifically mentions that oftentimes the reason we're restless is because we're trying to hitch ourselves to something other than God. We're idolatrous. We're idolatrous, and therefore we are restless. So we need to be fully alive, and we need to be fully alive in God, and that is what God wants. He's not competitive with us. He is trying to turn us into the image of his son. He wants us to be fully alive. He wants us to be humans, fully alive humans. The only way we do that is if we give up the things that are keeping us from being human and tether ourselves to God so that we can be like a bush on fire. The third principle is the John Damascus principle. Now, this was interesting because I wasn't expecting him to go here, but he's tethering it to his view of Balthasar and beauty. But Christianity, especially during the Protestant Reformation and the iconoclastic controversies that really found fruition in the Protestant Reformation, all of the art, all of the beauty, really, that constituted and made up the external expression of the faith, the external expression of the church, fell away by the wayside. So, in kind of a hyper rationalism that would develop, truth was important, but maybe not goodness, and specifically not beauty. Beauty is often left to the side. I just wrote an article recently on the reality that there is an objectivity to, for example, a sunset. It's a beautiful, objective moment when all of your sensorial expressions are fully engaged in something that is beautiful. And Jesus Christ is a lot like that. That was kind of the main motif of my article that I was writing. Too often we disassociate the objective beauty around the world and how it connects to God. And I think that's one of the things that Bishop Barron frequently is citing. What he's talking about here is, for example, the architecture of the buildings and all that stuff. If John Damascus did not create an argument against the iconoclasts, perhaps we would have had an even duller world, a duller church without beauty. We need to be inspired by beauty, and that's his main point. He talks about Thomas Aquinas and the necessity in a age of scientism to have a wedding of faith and reason. I think he specifically cites here the fact that in kind of the 1960s Catholicism, they did away with reason for the sake of trying to engage seekers with a more just a reductionistic view of what faith was. And that led to mass disaffiliation because people didn't actually believe in the doctrines. They didn't believe what was being taught. And once it became felt within kind of that societal milieu that it wasn't necessary to live a good life or to fill a sense of purpose and connection, meaning they did away with their faith because they thought they could. Now, of course, if you look at the stats, I think what you'll see is that in a religionless society that we find ourselves in, that isn't necessarily the case. But that was kind of the bait on the hook of the devil's scheme during this time. Bishop Barron wants to recapture faith and reason, and that goes all the way back to the medieval scholastics and what they were trying to accomplish to show that the Christian faith is intellectually defendable and verifiable. And if you study church history, what you find, at least in my personal experience of studying church history, when you study church history, what you find is that that was always the case. The doctrine of the Trinity is really an apologetic of trying to defend the Christian faith, not only from what the Bible is saying, but also from perhaps lesser views of who God is. It's all about trying to, again, the transcendentals of truth, goodness, and beauty. How do we paint a picture of God that is true and it paints him as good and it makes him the greatest expression of beauty that we would ever want to behold? It seems to me that that is what faith and reason are meant to do, working together. The mind, the will, and the heart all working together to worship. It's about worship. There's a Protestant pastor in the United States by the name of John Piper, and he's done a really good job of taking kind of these principles, and he has millions and millions of views. But what he basically says is that God is most satisfied in us when we are most satisfied in him. So he's talking about kind of that satisfaction, that happiness. And I think that's exactly he's getting it straight from Saint Augustine. That's where he's getting it. He's a studious Protestant pastor. But I think what he's getting at there is so crucial that you work with faith and reason together. And maybe I'm not connecting this entirely together well, but there's a sense when they have to work together, but ultimately you have to be worshiping, you have to be praising, you have to be satisfied in God for it to have any meaningful effect. And I think what Bishop Barron is getting at is the dumbed down intellectual antagonism to the intellectual part of the faith that led to mass disaffiliation. But I also think on the flip side, reason necessarily leads to beauty. I think, in my personal experience, the more I study the faith, the more I see the beauty in it. And I think it goes both ways. And I think that's a fundamental principle. And then he talks about evangelization and using of the media. Principle here that I'm basically picking up, and I'm living into this reality as well. And if you've made it this far in the video, you realize this as well. But media and using the mediums that God has given to reach people is the entire point, I think, of why we exist as Christians. We don't exist for me to go to heaven. That's a part of it, but the main point is to reach other people with Christ. That is what love is, willing the good of the other. What's the greatest good that you could possibly give another person? Jesus. And therefore we use every medium, even if people are antagonistic, even if people don't understand it, we use those mediums to reach other people. I started in the beginning of this video by saying that this is the 5 steps that will lead you to become more like Jesus. And I truly believe that that's ultimately what it's about. If you want to be like Jesus, you're going to have to reach people for Jesus. And the only way you do that is if you realize that God created humans to be fully alive. If you see and sense that their hearts are restless and you have to provide them with the thing by inspiring them with beauty, which is Jesus Christ, the icon of the invisible God, as Bishop Barron mentions in this clip, you have to inspire them with the fact that he is the one true God. And you don't do it by pointing to some abstraction. You point to the objective realities in the world. For example, the beauty of the church, the beauty of the Bible, the beauty of a sunset, even natural revelation. All of these things point people back to God. And then you tell them and you show them that they don't have to separate their doubts. They don't have to separate their skepticism. They can find intellectual answers with their reason that weds perfectly with the faith and the beauty of the transcendentals that they're seeing. And then you encourage them to go share it with others and to use the mediums by which they have access to, or even if they're, they have the ability to reach people in certain mediums that maybe they're trained in or professionally trained in or whatnot, and send them out. If you want to be like Jesus, and this is the entire point of this video, if you want to be like Jesus, you're going to have to try to reach people. You're going to have to try to evangelize. That is what God wants us to do. That is kind of like the climax. It's the beatific vision, I guess, of what God wants you to do. He wants you to be a human fully alive that reaches other people with his gospel message. All right, that's all I have for this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Remember that Christianity is Christ, and without him, there is no Christianity. See you in the next one. Peace.